Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Here Be Dragons. I am your host, Steven Stark. Got my trusty rusty internet husband slash sidekick slash co-host slash John.
Lots of
Good to have
slash.
you back, buddy.
It's good to be back. I'm really annoyed that I missed the stream on Everything Everywhere All at Once because I was actually really looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, that just means that you can cover said film on John Webster film, and you can
Mm,
talk about the filmmaking more than the philosophy, and you can have me as a guest.
this is true. But for anybody who does, I mean, mostly everybody here is in the Slack, but I've been really badly sick for about the past 2 weeks nonstop. It wasn't COVID. I was tested multiple times, including once at the doctor. Um, so I had some kind of bug that was had me with cough, sore throat, like congested passageways. There was one point where I pretty much just was like, okay, I want to die. Uh,
Right.
but I'm happy to be
Feeling it
feeling
now. Yep.
much better. I do feel like I told you, Stephen, I think my throat is a little dry right now, but we're going to try and just get through
Well,
that.
again, like you don't have to. I'm really glad you're here, though, man. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it has.
I see
And
we're both sporting Spider-Man.
yeah,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I delighted in finding this shirt, which I've had for a little while now. I think I wore it at HereBeCon.
Probably.
It spoke very like classic '90s animated,
Right.
Spider-Man to me. So I'm very glad to have this shirt.
You know what? Uh, let's give a shout out to the folks that are here early because I love you guys. Thank you for showing up, everybody.
Mm.
I see Micah Clark, uh, whose birthday was just a few days ago. Happy birthday again, Micah.
Happy birthday, Micah.
Kate's in the chat. Danny McKay, who got Wordle in one try yesterday. Like his starting word was the word of the day, and I'm just like, that. Yeah, I mean, I guess it happens, but congrats, man. Guilty Undertaker's in the house. Cece, Mrs. Duncan the Tall. Kartik is here. Sean, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. We're gonna just talk about Spider-Man. Basically, the first Spider-Man movie, Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man.
Which I got total like high school nostalgia. Um, Starting this up today because I remember like watching the trailer for this movie while I was in my high school TV production class. Like I would be pretending to do working on my like video projects, and then I'd be clicking over on the internet browser to, and it would be like the QuickTime file because
Right.
that was back in the day.
Back in the day, watching clips
Yeah,
pre YouTube.
yeah, no, and watching this movie, it does like it feels that like it was made right during that transition between like old school like superhero movie filmmaking
Yeah.
and and digital effects coming in because there's a
And
lot of like either or there's shots that do have a good deal of CGI in them, and then the next shot will be like almost no special effects in the shot, and you don't get that anymore because nowadays pretty much every shot of every movie has some element of visual effects.
right. Well, it like as you say, that's modern filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, visual. Like I don't want to go off on a tirade, but visual effects are important in a film that's meant to be somewhat of a spectacle.
Mm.
Kartik, you said this is the Doc Ock one, right? No, this is not the Doc Ock one. That is Spider-Man 2. This one is the Green Goblin. the iconic Willem Dafoe performance, where they told him, shoot for the moon, and he wound up in orbit around Jupiter or something.
I really cannot believe how, like, he went for it, man.
He really did.
He did not hold back, and that's why I think it was so rewarding to to see him come back around in Spider-Man No Way Home, and because that movie really does like pay homage to his work here and takes it even further. But it's just amazing that back then, because really, like, this was the beginning of not superhero movies in general, but like the influx of like super popular like comic book films in the early 2000s. And it wasn't like, it wasn't like nowadays we expect to see a lot of heavyweight actors and comic book films. I don't think it was necessarily the safest thing in the world to just go all in.
I you know what, I agree with your assessment. I think about people like James Franco and Tobey Maguire, and they were not established yet.
Yeah.
This is kind of the movie that established them both. Willem Dafoe had been around for a long time, but and Kirsten Dunst, had already made a name for herself. She'd already done probably that. What's that cheerleading movie? You know the one I'm talking about. We all watched it.
Oh, I didn't, but I know the name. Bring It On.
Yeah. You didn't watch that? You should.
No. When I was a teenager, I did not watch teenager movies.
And well, she also did like Interview with the Vampire.
Yes.
So she had been around for a while. Yeah. See, I knew Kate would know. See, again, that movie is fantastic. I don't know if I'm going to go so far as to say fantastic, but it's definitely worth watching.
Oh, that's right. She was also in Jumanji.
Okay. I don't remember that, but like Jumanji, I'm probably just a little bit too old for Jumanji to have any nostalgia for me,
Probably, yeah. I think I was just the right age for it. But yeah. And I think, Tobey Maguire wasn't super big yet, but I think he had been in
some
a couple
stuff.
things.
James Franco had done some stuff, but this is kind of breakout role, and everybody really kind of did a great job with this. So let's just start from there. A top-down view. Overall, this is a great movie.
Yeah,
it really is. It feels timeless, but of its time. It takes itself seriously. Sometimes, like Tim Burton's Batman is winking at the camera a little bit. And I don't feel like this movie ever does that.
I mean, I think it does it a little bit.
Okay, maybe so.
I because anything Sam Raimi intrinsically, has a bit of, there's an implied, I don't want to say it's not cheesiness, but there is I would actually say winking. I feel like, especially once you get into all the J. Jonah Jameson stuff.
Okay,
the Daily Bugle and stuff. He's having a lot of fun with it.
I will say that as well. What's his name? Is it J.K. Simmons?
J.K. Simmons.
I was thinking of a different person.
There's a reason why he was brought back as Jameson. You cannot get any better than him.
Just that loud, obnoxious. Oh, he's so good in this.
Especially and coming off of like I've said before, I was not really a comic book reader when I was young, so everything I knew about Marvel characters or DC characters, whatever, always came from usually either prior movies or, in this case, the animated series growing up. And when I saw J.K. Simmons on the screen as J. Jonah Jameson, my mind right away went to the animated series character, and I was like, "Oh my god, this guy has nailed this. He's perfect." Like,
yeah, like I'm sure there are other actors who could have done a good J. Jonah Jameson, but just I can't imagine anyone who could do it better. You know what I mean? Like there are good actors out there who can play any part, but he's perfect in it.
and what he did, which was so brilliant, was I feel like he perfectly captured like the pomposity of the character, but also made him absolutely hysterical.
Uh,
I'll make him infamous.
right?
It's just I just love
when
it.
it's in print, it's libel.
Yeah.
Are we going to talk about Bonesaw? You know what? We are. Even better, we're going to do it right now.
You're going nowhere.
Bonesaw's ready. I mean, that is. Oh God, he's a real pro wrestler. I was never into pro wrestling. I'm aware of him. I can't remember what he's called. Like his.
I don't. Well, I mean, I figured as much because I can't imagine finding someone like that outside of pro wrestling.
There it is, the Macho Man Randy Savage. Thank you, Sean.
Oh, is that who it is?
Yeah.
It shows like how little I actually know about pro wrestling. I had no idea that was actually him.
Sean knew, Kartik knew. Of course, Kartik knew. You brought up Bonesaw to begin with, but yeah, their dialogue was hilarious. Yeah. Like this movie, it managed to do a lot of things. It managed to have that thrilling action and some really tear-jerking scenes when we get to other stuff, especially involving Uncle Ben. It's funny. But one of the things that makes Spider-Man so endearing and so popular is that he is a great representation of the target audience of the original comic book.
Yeah.
So he is that awkward teenager coming of age, dealing with teenager BS. And that's exactly what that's what this movie is having him do. Yeah, you have to watch the Macho Man Slim Jim ads. Yeah. Bonesaw wants you to snap into a Slim Jim. Just. It's really funny, but it's such a small part of the movie too. But they got somebody who really knew what they were doing.
Which, by the way, I love the fact, of course, that oh God, what's the actor's name? He's always in Sam Raimi's movies.
Who are you talking about?
Hold on. God,
I don't even know which character in this movie you're talking about.
He plays the announcer.
Oh, okay. Bruce Campbell.
There you go. I loved spotting him there because he's always in there somewhere, and I love the idea that from this movie to the second one he changes careers from a wrestling announcer to running the tickets at the at the theater in part 2.
Eric says it's interesting that both Tobey Maguire Spidey and MCU Spidey, both working class kids with a billionaire patron, but Maguire's is the villain. You're not wrong. That is a fun inverse parallel, and it that's one of the things that really kind of amps up the stakes in this movie too, because it's bad. What Green Goblin is doing is bad, but it's not in the world, blow up the sun type bad. It's.
Yeah, I'm going to try and avoid, saying what I like about this movie versus what the MCU does. It's
Right.
Because for me, Spider-Man has always been, he's the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's taking, on New York problems, not
Mhm.
like big, larger than life,
It was his
world-ending
best
problems.
friend's dad and his patron.
Yeah.
And the way they spin it is he's I'm a big believer in the redemption arc, but they make him pretty awful, you know, pretty unrepentant. Uh, His mental health notwithstanding, it's very unfortunate and all that. But Norman Osborn wasn't a great person to begin with. Let's be honest. So when he kind of went over the edge, he went way over the edge.
I mean, I kind of disagree about that.
You think?
Yeah, I mean, okay, he didn't have the most, maybe not the most admirable line of work. He's creating military weapons, but he seems to care about his son.
He does.
And actually, something that I made note of watching this time through, when he decides to do the reckless experiment, he does it on himself. He doesn't like pass it off to some underling and say, I'm going to risk your life instead of mine. He actually takes it on himself.
But is that egomania? Is that narcissism? You know what I mean? Like, you can read that. I think Norman Osborn is a pretty bad dude to begin with. I think his expectation, like, does he care about his son? Sure. But are his expectations of his son overbearing and unrealistic? I think also yes.
Okay, but a lot of parents have that
That's
issue.
true.
It doesn't make them.
Villain, so I don't care.
I don't know. I always felt sorry for Norman. I don't
there's
actually.
definitely, you can feel sympathy for him, but
I think we just see like so much of him as Green Goblin, but I've always felt like his performances when he's Norman is actually, there's softness there, and I don't know. I think I'm gonna disagree there.
Hey, we can disagree. It's not like the foundation of our working relationship wasn't founded on the fact that we disagreed in harmony. You know,
and it's part of the reason why I felt so much like emotional catharsis when they finally cure him and in No Way Home. But also then there's tragedy there, because my actual read on this isn't a No Way Home stream, but my read on that is I think most of those characters are going back to their deaths anyway. So actually there's a lot of tragedy inherent there, and you can actually read the end of this movie this way as well. If like that last moment when he says don't tell Harry, that could have been him right after he's experienced all the events of No Way Home, and he's just arrived back in that time, and that would make for a very tragic read on. But we're going to focus just on this movie.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with mentioning other things that connect to this. Like, one of the things I wanted to make sure that I brought up was that in my all-time favorite Spider-Man movie, which is Into the Spider-Verse, this is the canonical Peter Parker.
Yeah.
This guy.
Yeah, and one of my the thing that automatically like pulled me into the Spider-Verse when the movie started was the fact that, when they show Uncle Ben in the opening like montage, it's Cliff Robertson. It's his Uncle Ben. It's his voice saying, "With great power comes great responsibility." And they got the whole image of, the upside down kiss, and
right
from this movie and all that,
and referencing like the dance from the later movies. Like, this is that Peter Parker.
Yeah, and
he's kind of established in Into the Spider-Verse as being really almost the idealized version of Spider-Man.
Well, actually, That's funny. We could do a whole discussion about Into the Spider-Verse too, because that first Spider-Man is actually not this Spider-Man.
It's a version that's very close.
Because if you, yeah, it's close. All of them are like really close, but it's funny because if you pay attention to that opening montage where he's talking, Mary Jane is actually the one hanging upside down, and he's on the ground. So like,
it could just be a later time.
Yeah. But the point was like they drew on you know, on these movies. And I think even there were even some shots that were from the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man too. They were kind of pulling from, it was like the whole thing about that Spider-Man movie was like bringing all the fans in to enjoy and I like that. I liked that a lot of that was grounded in this Spider-Man.
Yeah. Sorry, Amy, this made me chuckle, so had to throw it up. Good. It's good.
But yeah, no, it's and the reason why that was so important to me is because like this is, you know, it's very, these movies were very important to me. I mean, I was like, what was it 2002? So I was 16 years old when this came out. So
the perfect age for this movie.
Yeah.
And it helps that, like, because Spider-Man represents the target audience of the comic book so well, because not only is he a teenager dealing with teenager stuff, he's a nerd dealing with nerd stuff.
Yeah.
And he gets picked on for that. He feels like a certain level of ostracism from this, you know, the larger social group of his high school. And that is sort of personified in Flash Thompson for most Spider-Man franchises. You know, you've got your Flash Thompson who's the role is just to be antagonistic, you know. And this particular Flash Thompson is played by Travis Willingham.
No, Joe Manganiello or
Joe Manganiello. You're right. I'm sorry. I
yeah,
got the names
there
confused.
you go.
Yes, Joe Manganiello. Noted Dungeons and Dragons uber nerd Joe Manganiello.
No, I remember at one point I went back to watch this and I noticed that. I was like, holy shit.
Yep. But noted D&D nerd. I love that guy. He's great.
But yeah, I mean, the only thing that could have made Peter Parker like more of a stand-in for me is if he was a big movie nerd.
Right.
Movie buff. Yeah, movie buff. But he is the perfect stand-in if you're, you know, shy, reserved, don't fit in, you know. It's, you know, it's perfect if you're coming to, you know, either the comic book or the movie, you know, feeling like that. It's, you know, it's a dream come true to then see your stand-in become, you know, a superhero with all these abilities.
It is. And like, again, I'm a good decade older than you, John. So I was not a teenager when this film came out. I was a dad, you know, I was a grown adult, 27 or so. 28, 27 probably when the movie came out. And but I still loved it. I thought it was fantastic representation of, and again, that's down to the elevation of the craft of filmmaking in general, be that the after effects or even the in camera as cameras get smaller and technology gets better, you can do things with cameras that you couldn't do before.
Yeah.
I feel like this movie takes advantage of that in a big way, and like the physics felt pretty real. Maybe for the first time ever with CG. Like, your eye is kind of fooled. That's really Spider-Man jumping around.
Yeah, I remember at the time there was some criticism about the CGI, like when Spider-Man is hopping around, but I've always maintained that for 2002, CGI, I thought they did a really good job, and it laid the groundwork for all the Spidey movies that would follow. And I think even by Spider-Man 2, it was just utterly magnificent, and I'd argue that it is pretty damn good in this one too.
Yeah, I think so. So, like, you can just buy in on this one, You don't. You're not constantly taking out going, that doesn't look real, that doesn't look real, that doesn't look real. Even the pumpkin bombs that the Goblin uses and the effects of, like, turning people to ash, which was creepy AF, by the way. I was not prepared for that the first time I saw it.
Still, I say that none of the effects went into what I like to call Stardust territory, which was, for those of you who remember when I did a review of Stardust on my channel, there's a couple of shots in the opening of that movie that look so bad.
Yeah. But that's also the movie that gave us basically throwing a stiff stuffed goat across the bar. Like, you don't watch Stardust for the effects.
Yeah, and in fairness, most of the effects, are still fine. It's just those couple of effects in the beginning of the movie that are like, ugh. And for me, none of the effects of this movie, it went there. So they did a passing grade for me.
Eric says that he thought that the skeletons in Pumpkin Bomb seemed to look plastic. I disagree. It kind of freaked me out almost. I was like, whoa, crap.
No, those looked like very much like early CGI.
Okay. And Sean says the only meh part for him, CG-wise, was when he's hopping on the balloons at the parade.
I just thought that was funny. It looked a little funny.
Yeah, it does. It does. Like, it's not perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect movie except for that one.
Well, and the thing is, like, you're never going to be able to point to, a movie from this era with a lot of CGI and say that it's got flawless effects. Right. I wouldn't even say that about Lord of the Rings, as beautiful as the effects are.
Right.
You can still tell that. Yeah, you can still tell that they've improved since then, and that's the whole thing about visual effects, is they're always improving, especially the computer generated effects. But you have to make those leaps so that
you have to make this movie so that the next one can be better.
Yeah, exactly.
Right on. So Kirsten Dunst is in this,
and I'm going to get the shallow part out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
She is so absolutely beautiful. That's like,
okay.
Like, just that I had that flashback moment of, that's right, I was a teenager when this came out, and I was blown away by her beauty. But also, she's fantastic in the role. It's not the most it's 20 years ago. We've come a long way in terms of female characters. She is like, Mary Jane is the damsel in distress.
She is
role. That said, but I do think that Kirsten Dunst does a great job playing the character.
Yeah. But not the sexiest Mary Jane in the world. That would be Emma Stone, of course, but
she didn't play Mary Jane.
Oh, you're right. She played
Gwen Stacy.
Oh, damn it.
But
please don't take my nerd card away. I promise. I know what Thaco means.
I won't.
Okay, thank you, John.
Um,
That's like 2 or 3 actors I've gotten wrong just in the first part of this conversation. Wow.
but no, I've always loved the dynamic between her and Tobey Maguire in these movies. I thought did a great job and together, and 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 I love that they did throw in one tiger for us in this movie, because that's always Mary Jane's catchphrase for Peter.
So, real talk. This movie changed Spider-Man for me forever.
How so?
Because I grew up in the 70s, okay? And 80s. And I was never a comic book nerd. Never have been, never gonna be. Hats off to you guys. If you love it, please, by all means, love it, collect them, read them, talk about them. It's never been my thing. I was a Dungeons and Dragons nerd. But, where do you go to get your D&D stuff? The comic book shop. But so my exposure to Spider-Man was as shorts on like an old show called The Electric Company. And then there were some animated things that occasionally might pop up here or there. But honestly, my exposure to Spider-Man was very limited. So, excuse me. And some of these shorts that they made did not have much imagination as far as, and it's like it's a PBS show with Spider-Man in it. So their effects are he throws a net at someone to web them. So I never had a connection to Spider-Man, and I was an adult when this movie came out, but it made me go, "Oh, this I understand. This struggle, like." There was no Peter Parker representation in my exposure to Spider-Man. It was just the character throwing nets on people, basically. But when you added that struggling teenager and the sort of body dysmorphia that you feel when you're going through that time, the way that's reflected in his journey coming to terms with his new abilities, it really did click with me. And it made me understand the character in a way that I never did before. Because up to that point, he's just this weird guy who could climb on walls and shoot webs.
Yeah, for me, it's the same as Guilty. It was always the animated series from the 90s, and as a matter of fact,
but you got to understand, in the 90s, I was in the army and then having children.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I just didn't have time for that. Well, the early part of the 90s, I was in high school, which I guess I could have watched, but I don't know, when did that Spider-Man show come out?
I'm trying to remember when it was.
Because I graduated high school in 94, and there's no I wasn't watching that stuff, Hi, Aaron. I see you can't stay, but I just wanted to say hi back to you.
I feel like it was the mid 90s.
Yeah, I was in the army. And then after the army kids, there was just, I missed it. I missed the boat on Spider-Man, which is kind of wild to say.
Well, it's funny because at the same time as the Spider-Man animated series, you also had X-Men, the animated series, as well as there was even a Fantastic Four animated series, which was wasn't as successful. But it's funny because all these different shows, I think there might have even been an Iron Man one, were kind of, on, through like Fox Morning, cartoons for kids. It was almost like the it was like the kids animated version of the MCU.
Mhm.
They didn't connect a whole lot, but I do remember specifically there was an arc where the X-Men showed up on the Spider-Man show, and there was
Right.
this whole thing. So you did feel like the worlds were interconnected a bit.
A bit, yeah.
Yeah. So but I just remember like that's where my love of Marvel came from, were those shows. And that then springboarded me onto the films that started to come out around this time, the X-Men films and the Spider-Man movie. And so yeah, it was all like a natural progression of all of that for me. And it was funny because at the time, it's hilarious because Tobey Maguire is clearly like not a teenager in this.
Yeah, he's
But
like 24 or something.
but it's funny because in the animated series, Peter Parker, I think, is actually in college. And so he looks even older as an animated character. And so when I saw this movie, I was like, that's a bit younger looking than the Peter Parker I imagine. And then, of course, now watching it, I'm like, oh God, the teacher looks the same age as the students.
Hollywood teenagers.
Yeah. And so in essence, they've only really gotten the age stuff right with the newer stuff.
And Tom Holland is, I mean, he's like 25 now. But back
Yeah.
when he was shooting Spider-Man, he bet it might have been more like 17 or 18.
Yeah, well, it's been a good number of years now, but when Civil War came out, he looked like a teenager. So
Civil War was 2012, is it?
No, 2016.
Oh, first Avengers was 2012. There you go.
I shouldn't be more
accurate.
accurate
Over there at me getting stuff wrong.
I shouldn't be more accurate about the MCU than you, Steven. That's not right.
Look, long story short, my brain doesn't work as well as it used to.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, and Kate is right about this. Tom does have that baby face. He looks like a kid.
Yeah.
Like, even at 25, he still looks like a kid. Oh, that's cool. You were in Chicago when they shot The Dark Knight. You think I'm retrograde.
But that being said, I couldn't have cared less about that when I was, still in high school, in my last year of high school, as a matter of fact, when watching this, and it was just a dream come true to see this on the big screen. And of course, like, what was great about that was I could not have asked for a better couple of years in terms of being like a movie fan as a teenager. Because
was there some movie that came out say in December of last year that kind of blew your whole mind?
Well, you had, let's see, during this span of years, you had Lord of the Rings, you had Spider-Man, you had the Star Wars prequels, there was X-Men. Like, it was just nerdvana for me at that point in my life. So I think I was very well treated as a movie geek.
Sorry, I'm just reading the chat real quick. Okay, so we've kind of meandered all over the place with this. Do you have like a favorite moment from this movie?
You might expect me to pick like an intense action moment or something, but my favorite moment has always been the very end of this film, because it sends chills down my spine, and it's after the moment between Peter and Mary Jane, and when he says, "I'll always be your friend. It's all I have to give," and he walks away, and it's that moment when she touches her lips, sort of figuring out that that he is in fact, or that he might be Spider-Man. And it's when Danny Elfman's cue kicks in, And then you hear Peter's voice over, I will never forget these words. With great power comes great responsibility. And, he gives that whole speech. And every single time I watch this movie, I get chills. Same thing today. I rewatched it. And just like when I was in theaters, got chills down my spine. So, might seem a little weird to pick the very end as, as that moment, but I just absolutely love it. And, yeah,
The
that's a
reveal of
good
his
one too.
costume at the wrestling match. It's pretty great. It's pretty great. Like his backyard superhero costume.
It's so great. And then we don't actually see how he manages to pull off making the real costume. Going to assume there was a very lengthy time gap as he as he worked on it. But
yeah, God dang it! I had something I wanted to say. I am just not at peak performance today, y'all. My eye has been bothering me for quite some time, so forgive me for being a little scatterbrained. But there was something I wanted to bring up. But one of my dogs is raising a ruckus. I'm not sure if you could hear, but one of my dogs was making enough noise that it distracted me. But yeah, help me find my way back, John. Come on, say something.
we're talking about favorite parts.
That's what we're talking about. Okay. It's ridiculous. It's probably the most ridiculous shot in the whole movie, and it's probably my favorite. And that's when he trips over Mary Jane and catches Mary Jane and the tray, and then all the food lands perfectly, and it's all balanced. And it's like, yeah. I don't know why I love that shot so much, but I do. It's not even great CG in that moment. Like, it's maybe you're right. That's probably the biggest wink at the camera moment, at least as far as I can tell, because it is so over the top. But I love that.
There's a joke on the commentary track, I think, where they're playing it off like that they didn't use any special effects for that, and it's like we had to do 100 takes of that until Tobey got that right, which he did that all on his own.
Right.
No, I love that, and then her whole great reflexes. It feels like such. It actually feels really of its time. Like, for some reason, just the sensibility of that, and then I think that's what I like about it. I remember when the movie was coming out and I saw previews for it, it just felt like such a, sort of hip, modern, like 2000s take on Spider-Man, with stuff like that. And
Spider-Man should appeal to the teenager of its day.
Yeah.
Like, and I think if you make that Spider-Man, people who have ever been that person will also flock to that. You ever been an awkward teenager? Most of us in our 30s and 40s would be like, yeah, I was. Well, yeah. So like, if you make it for the awkward teenager, but make it, because the awkward teenager isn't dumb either. They definitely have the full range of human emotion and cognition, and maybe not so much like foresight a lot of times, but still, as part of that process. And then when you present them with a story that appeals to them, all of us who have ever been there will connect with it, even if we're not there now, so to speak.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, they're definitely. It's fine. But yeah, dogs are definitely like making a bunch of racket.
What I love though is, and we alluded you alluded to this a bit earlier, is as much as, there is some, the goofiness and humor and stuff, but it's all underlaid with this, real emotion, and that comes in definitely when, with the Uncle Ben character, and, when he dies, and Peter feels responsible, and it just takes on this. I mean, the scenes where he's coping with that, and and realizing that he has to, live up to what Uncle Ben expected of him, and
right. Well, and it's such a moment of coming of age, and having realizations about the world. The the unforeseen consequences of not stopping that criminal was that he went on to be a criminal.
Yeah.
And having somebody you care deeply about murdered by that person, that's kind of extreme. It's a pretty hardcore origin story, as Nicolas Cage might say in my favorite Spider-Man movie. But it's such a pivotal moment for almost every iteration of Spider-Man, and there have been dozens over the years, is the realization that, I mean, Uncle Ben tells him, with great power comes great responsibility. But I really like kind of the way that Tom Holland said it, which is in his first appearance, which is, when people do bad things and you could do something about it, you don't, the bad things happen because of you.
Mm.
And that feeling of like taking ownership, and much of that movie is about the way that Uncle Ben's death affects Peter, is probably the main emotional through line of this film.
Yeah.
All the way down to remembering him at Norman Osborn's funeral, calling back to that great power, great responsibility speech when he's talking to Mary Jane.
Yeah, it's, and going back to, we talked about how the fact that line is even, and that iteration of that line is played back even into the Spider-Verse. It's had such resonance for an entire generation. I feel it's so powerful. I mean, for multiple generations, because it's not just a line from this movie. Obviously, it's part of, who Spider-Man is through the comics, through everything. But I think especially the way that Cliff Robertson played the role and delivered that line, and that's another thing about tapping into something for this target audience, is that there's also, and I think you have this no matter what age you are, but especially when you're younger, that fear of losing a parent, and the fact that I think that moment when Ben dies is just so gut-wrenchingly hard to deal with, and so that line reverberates, and I think that's part of what makes the Spider-Man story so powerful.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like Laura brings up I missed the part where that's my problem line, which is a very teenager thing to say, and so to speak, in that moment, because it doesn't take that long for him to figure out why that part, to figure out the part where it is his problem.
Yeah, and I think even as an audience, you're a participant in that moment, because you actually even feel like it's a little, like it's justified, like that guy was a dick. So yeah, it's a moment that probably, on first viewing gets a chuckle, and then, upon reflection, you're like, oh shit. And, and you have the same reaction that Peter has. It's like, then that was a that was a selfish moment he had, and and he's paying the price for that. We can get into
Well,
retcons of later movies and whatnot, but as far as this movie is concerned, that decision leads to the death of Uncle Ben. And yeah, that's a like you said, Nick Cage, saying it's a hardcore origin story, because it is.
It is. Like, there have been a lot of iterations on this particular character, Peter Parker, over the years. We've seen a lot of different people play him, and play him interesting and differently from each other, and well. Not every Spider-Man movie has landed, but every Spider-Man actor has brought something to the part, be they the live-action movies or animated undertakings of various types. And there have been iterations on Aunt May, be they, the Marissa Tomei in the MCU, or this Aunt May, or maybe you like the one from Into the Spider-Verse. Like, all of those are great options. But this is Uncle Ben. And almost everybody's going to agree with that. And that might just be down to lack of representation for other Uncle Bens, but he plays it so gently, so kind-hearted. He's genuinely, reaching out to Peter. With great power comes great responsibility. And he's saying that to him in a time where Peter is lying to him about where he's going and what he's doing. Which is probably part of why it feels so impactful later on in the movie, because so much is tied up in that last interaction with Ben. Take me to the library. I'm actually going to go to the wrestling thing. And I think maybe even Ben kind of suspects that this isn't a library trip, but, he's letting Peter spread his wings a little bit. I'm not going to force you to tell me exactly what's going on. I'm just going to tell you this. I'm going to try to impart a life lesson.
Yeah, I'm actually quite a fan of the first Amazing Spider-Man film with Andrew Garfield, but there's no denying that, unfortunately, Martin Sheen's portrayal of Uncle Ben gets the short shift because it came a bit too quickly after these films. And Cliff Robertson has the sort of definitive portrayal of Uncle Ben, and in part because he was the first one on screen to do it. But it was so powerful. But I think that's what's so great about No Way Home, is it gave a chance to reconcile all those different threads from the different movies and boils it down to the shared experience that all the different Peters have had.
Mm-hmm.
And so that regardless of whether it's, Aunt May from, this movie, or, Marissa Tomei's version, or even, I'm drawing a blank. The actress who plays it in the Andrew Garfield, Sally Field, actually.
Sally Field,
yeah. But when they're all talking about, on that rooftop scene about Aunt May or Uncle Ben, or like, there's just this emotional core that resonates, amongst all of them. And I just, I think that was so beautifully done that, it's hats off to them just for the way they pulled that off, because it's the reason why I like that movie so much is because it really does honor what came before.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that was not, it's no small feat, I think. But
yeah, I agree. But I guess focusing back in on this film specifically, it's one of those things that he's really not in that much of the movie.
Yeah, and but his presence is so,
and
it's so powerful.
That's down to the writing, but it's also down to Tobey Maguire doing some pretty heavy lifting with his acting. Because let's face it, superhero movies are ridiculous. They're very silly, and at their heart, they can have a lot of other things attached to them. But superhero movies are kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the characters that live in those worlds have to feel like it's ridiculous. And I'm really glad that they don't. But Toby has to struggle with that loss of Uncle Ben throughout the whole film, because that's the emotional weight of the movie right there, is him finding a way to make it matter.
Yeah, it's funny because it's even like, as one of my memories of these movies is like when Toby is like, swinging through, the New York streets, is that a lot of times he's, sort of whooping and hollering, from the excitement of, hey, I'm swinging on webs. But then after Ben's death, there's a sort of drive and determination with, what he's doing when he's going after the criminal, and he's very dark in those scenes with the when he catches up with him. Like, he doesn't actually shove the guy, but that's a very dark moment for him where, he doesn't stop the guy from falling to his death. And to then find that balance throughout the rest of the film, because this is a fun superhero movie, but also this is a character who's consumed with his uncle's death, and that's weighing very heavily on him. Like, that's not an easy thing for an actor to pull off in a summer blockbuster.
Yeah,
I think he's amazing at it.
Again, I think he was the right choice. I can't tell you who else should have played Peter Parker in this particular movie. I think he was the right choice. Again, is he too old? Yes. But is he a great actor who can carry the emotional weight? Yes. Did he sell the physicality? Yeah. I thought he did fantastic overall. I find especially young Tobey Maguire to have an eminently punchable face. But that's on me, not him. He can't help the way his face looks. He can't help that it triggers some part of my brain that makes me want to punch him in his face. But like older version of him that showed up in No Way Home, I was like, I would never punch that guy.
I'm sorry. I just thinking about what you're saying about his face brings me back to there's that moment in part 2 when he's trying to get his powers back and he's doing that slow motion run and his face like contorts it's a different hilarious ways. So yeah, it's Toby's face does some interesting things, but but I love it. And oh god, now I've gotten distracted. I had something else
again, like I don't know who I would replace him with. A younger actor might have struggled. I'm not sure who was a teenager 20 years ago that I would want to put in that role. I can't really think of anyone. Somebody who'd be, between like 35 and 40 now. So that 20 years ago, this movie came out, which means 21 years ago it was being filmed. So yeah, somebody who was an actual teenager back then, I can't think of somebody off the top of my head.
Well, that's just not what was done either back then. It's like you had adults playing.
Look who came up with the obvious answer. Right. Sure. Aspitz bin Sanin, I hope I got your name right. Can we show the full Spider-Man t-shirt we're wearing? Yeah, you know what? Here you go. So I think mine is actually a Miles Morales version.
let's
Yeah, okay, there you go. So there's mine. Hold on, let me back up a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Lift up my chin to get the beard out of the way. There's mine. And then, John, you want to show yours real quick?
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when there's nothing beneath that. So
Yeah.
it's just
pretty simple and straightforward, but it's still great design, great color of the shirt, too.
yeah, like I said, it's very reminiscent of the animated series, which is why I got it. And you know, because that's, as much as I love these movies, especially for a lot of Marvel stuff, the animated shows are my holy grail. So yeah, I definitely wanted this one.
I think this just really successfully brought Spider-Man into the modern zeitgeist in the era right before nerd culture took off, really kind of since 2008 to 2012 is when it really started to ramp up. This came out 10 years prior to that, but that might have a lot to do with the fact that the 16-year-olds watching this movie in 2002 were the 25-year-olds watching the premiere of Game of Thrones or watching MCU movies back in the early days with Iron Man and First Avenger. You know,
yeah, as much as people know how much, like, as far as comic book characters, especially Marvel stuff, X-Men is like my all-time favorite stuff. But I will fully admit that even though X-Men came out first in 2000, this was the one that had the obscene breakthrough success. Mm-hmm. It broke box office records. It was enormous. And so I feel like this is the movie that really set the stage for sort of modern, comic book, hysteria, comic book movie hysteria.
Right. Like, there were comic book movies before that. And we've talked about a few of them on this channel. You had Superman, a few Superman movies of varying levels of quality. You had Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns, which I love both of those. It goes down pretty steeply after. Actually, I say that.
In truth, we scoff at it now, but Batman Forever was actually obscenely popular when it came out. It's just, unfortunately, it was followed up by Batman and Robin.
Yeah, I actually do like that movie as well.
Yeah, and yeah, as I said, X-Men was the first one through the gates of the new era of comic book films, and I think it showed people that they could take these films seriously. But it, like I said, it was Spider-Man was the one that had the enormous blow-up success, and because I think that's the one that, because of who its target audience was. I mean, it appealed to a wide range of people, but because it was specifically targeted at at the teenage kids, and had a character who was who resembled them. So I think it was just the perfect movie at the perfect time. And that's why, as much as I kind of, I'm not always crazy about the sensibilities of the MCU films, where they're more family friendly and have a lot of humor and that type of thing. But it is kind of that's what the Spider-Man movies were too. They were accessible to all audiences, and just fun to go watch. And I think that's what people wanted. And I think that's probably still, what people want. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I even think that Kevin Feige was an associate producer on this movie.
Oh, don't make me lie to you. I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I think he also had a small behind the scenes role on X-Men as well, but I think he had a bit of a bigger behind the scenes role in this movie, and that kind of set the stage for one day when he'd be the one calling the shots.
We're about to do the mid-roll, but I wanted to bring this up. There's been a couple of talks or a couple of things said about some cameos. Apparently, Ed Sheeran is in the subway scene of this movie 20 years ago. Really?
Are we sure about that?
I think I'm trolling. I don't know. But then, we talked about the Lucy
Lawless.
Yeah.
I have seen this movie so many times, and I never noticed that before until I was reading something before I did my rewatch today, saw her name, and then the moment I saw her, I was like, oh my God, it's Lucy Lawless, and I never, ever noticed.
I still didn't notice. I'm not, I'll have to go back and look at that scene. I missed it.
I was ashamed
to talk about it.
I was ashamed of myself, honestly.
Yeah, come on. I can't even keep my actors straight. I don't expect me to catch a cameo. I love, so apparently this was a joke. You really got me?
Well, I would hope so. It's like...
It'd be funny if it was him. But 20 years ago, I'm just like, no, he was a teenager also, wasn't he? Anyway, you know what? Let's do a mid-roll. We've been going for a little over an hour already. So, yeah, let's do that. So, mid-roll, please subscribe to the channel. You know, hit the little thumbs up button to like the video. If you like talking about nerdy stuff, great. You found a place where we love to talk about nerdy stuff. Love to have my friends come on and talk about nerdy stuff with us too. That being said, we've been in a little bit of a lull lately. Nessie has been on, not vacation, but she has been out of town from home in the place she's eventually moving to. John has been feeling not great. I have been feeling not great. So we've been a little bit...
yeah, well, at first, because first Nessie and I were out of town for a long while, and then I wound up getting sick very shortly after I got back from Maryland. So it's just been like a domino effect of things, but I'm better now. So we're good. Which, did you actually want to talk about what we might do next week? Because
like we have definitely, there's been a lull in content of, you know, in anything for us to get, or for me to get super excited about. But we do have, like, there are things on the not too distant horizon that we will be able to talk about, and new stuff. So, John, what are some stuff that we're going to talk about soon? What are some stuff?
All right, some stuff coming up. Well, I actually just started watching one of those things, which just got released, which is I've watched the first 2 episodes of Sandman, which I have never read the graphic novels before, but I'm actually loving the show so far. So there's that. There is a little show which people might not have heard of called House of the Dragon.
I haven't heard of that.
Coming out. Yeah, I know.
Oh, you mean Hot D?
No. Pretty sure that's not it.
Pretty sure it is. Are you talking about the ones with the blonde people and the dragons? That's called Hot D.
Oh, I think you're mistaken. Anyway, and then next month we get into the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power, which I don't even know how I'm going to feel about yet.
Lord of the Rings, the Rings.
I'm keeping an open mind.
Again, it's not one that's like that I'm just clamoring for, but I'm definitely going to watch it.
I think it could be either really, really great or yeah. But we'll see. And then after that, it was supposed to come out this month, but it got pushed the next month. The newest Star Wars show, Andor, which I'm really looking forward to, because this looks like it's going to be a lot of intrigue and spying and then
immorality.
Yeah, exactly, and galactic politics. And this might actually be the type of Star Wars show I wanted back when the Mandalorian was coming out, before we all knew that was actually going to turn out to really be the Baby Yoda show. Because I thought I was getting like the dirty underworld show of Star Wars. That's not quite what we got.
Dirty Underworld adjacent, but
yeah. And then
we've also talked about maybe doing What We Do in the Shadows season 4.
Yeah.
Probably wait for the end of the season before we do that. But yeah, we've definitely got some stuff on the horizon. There's a Willow TV show coming out in November that I'm super excited for. And who knows what else along the way. But yeah, we definitely have some shows coming. But these also only fill up so much space. So we're gonna I'm always trying to figure out stuff to talk about. And here's the thing. John, this is probably not interesting, and I'm sorry. But I said it earlier, I'm not a comic book nerd, I'm a D&D nerd. And many, many, many of you play D&D with me. I run 4 different D&D games for a total of 18 different players. So, like, there's a lot. D&D is my big thing. I'm probably just going to be doing maybe a little bit more D&D content than I have been in the past. And I'm not sure exactly what format that's going to take, but, you know, we're going to figure that out, because I want to talk about my favorite thing, which is D&D, which I play a lot of. Might start doing class discussions. Who knows? Anyway, but yeah, so there's that. Movies will come out that we'll want to talk about. We'll think of some older retro review movies that we want to talk about. I really think we're probably, as a channel, due for a sort of like an update on how do I want to put this? I struggle with my mental health sometimes, and I feel like it's good. Part of the way I can help hold myself accountable is to continue to talk to my audience or my friends, or, you know, whoever needs to hear about it. Because even as somebody who's pretty successful in this nerd space community, I still have the anxiety, the social anxiety. I still have the imposter syndrome, all that stuff. So yeah, I think just having those conversations and normalizing having those conversations has been a good thing that we've done here before, and it probably needs to continue. I also have I know that nerd on the not too distant horizon that I'm excited for. And John, you haven't even heard about this one yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think maybe you have. I don't think you have. Oh, yeah. And it's going to remain secret until we get much closer to the time. But I'm excited for it. It's probably going to be next month or more or later. We also need to make sure we shout out our patrons, because they are rock stars who rock. Right? We love these people. I mean, we love everyone, but our patrons, we love you more. You paid us to do so. So it
would be unfair if
it would be unfair. You're right, John, and we are all about fair play here. So many thanks to our Patreon High Council, including our alpha patron, Ridiculous Ed Tollett, aka Sean. We love you, buddy. As well as Lord John Bronstein the Wise. And our High Council is supported by the nobility of the realm, including the Cloaked One of the Underworld, Ryan Stavka, the Russian Quartermaster, Reflective Rambling, Arch-Maester Emma, Kate, Mistress of the House of Books, Jared Kozal, Doctor of Dragons, Lady Maura Lee of Starfall, and Lady Rita, the Unbound. Thank you, patrons. We love you guys. If you want to become a patron, we don't do Patreon exclusive content. We want everything to be open to everyone all the time. But, if you want to help us, maintain camera, pay for streaming software, what have you, thank you. You can do that through the Patreon link down below, and we will thank you very much for it. What else, John? What else?
Well, before we dive back in, I just wanted to address what our two Dans are talking about. I don't believe Stephen or Nessie has watched any of the Orville. But I will just say that I have been watching it. I loved the new season. So even though we more than likely won't be talking about it on this channel, just wanted to say to you guys, yeah, it's been really great. 2 thumbs up.
Right on. John, if you want to jump back in, go ahead. I'm actually going to shut off the camera and run away and run right back. But
okay,
you've got this, buddy. I believe in you. I'll be back in seconds.
Cool. Yeah, I've been watching Sandman over the past couple days, and holy crap, that's a great show. 2 episodes and I'm already sucked into the world. So if I can get Steven or Nessie to watch that one, maybe we'll hopefully do a discussion on that, because it's the world building of that is really great, and the cast is fantastic. I mean, they give us Charles Dance in the first episode, so
isn't Gwen Christie in that as well?
Yeah, she plays Lucifer.
Lucifer, right?
Yeah, which is great. I'm just excited to see her in something where she actually has a meaty role, because I always feel like she's getting cast in these really small parts in these big properties.
Yeah, we know from Game of Thrones that she can kind of do it all. Sorry, eye's bothering me, and I have to treat my eye real quick. So,
that's fine.
And I don't want y'all watching me do that. But I am here. I have not seen that. It's on my radar a little bit, but
yeah, I'm actually taking my time with it.
About next week, did we ever even decide that? Because Nessie's not here next week either.
Yeah, I floated the idea of actually, because we were talking about stuff to come. So I had floated the idea of possibly doing a preview show where we talk about,
all the stuff coming up.
Yeah,
and fine. The fall preview for all the shows coming up, and we'll talk about what we're looking forward to.
Because my thoughts on all that stuff before it comes out is probably going to be completely different from my thoughts afterwards.
I'm down for that.
So it might be interesting.
Dear viewer, if you would like to join us for a conversation about that, we do that stuff all the time. Many of you know where to find me anyway, but if not, best way is through Twitter. My Twitter handle's down there. So's John's. So's Nessie's.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know another way, that's the best way. God dang, my eye is bugging me. Okay, so Spider-Man.
So, all right. So we've talked about Tobey.
Mm-hmm.
I think we gave Uncle Ben,
Yeah, we gave
his due, and we did talk about Willem Dafoe. And I will say, I know we were in disagreement about this, but I like the way that he alternates, his performance between Green Goblin and Norman, because I do feel Norman has a softer side to him where you almost feel like you want to like the guy, and then he turns around and he even has like a Gollum conversation scene where he's
it's so good.
talking to himself in the mirror. It's great.
Leave and never come back.
Which, by the way, speaking of stuff coming up this year, we'll be doing our retro review of The Two Towers.
Yeah, you got to wait for December, but it's not 20 years old yet.
Yeah.
But it will be this December. Yeah, but like, not only did this help catapult sort of the modern comic book movie, because you can see a huge difference between this film and everything that came before it versus what came after it. And you can see how it really, like, the fingerprints of this movie are in Multiverse of Madness to some degree, just some of the sensibilities of how superhero movies are shot, how those stories are told.
I think, well, especially it's even more apparent with Spider-Man 2, because I feel like Spider-Man 2 and Multiverse of Madness really share a lot of sensibilities, visually and just, which, and since we're putting a mention in there real quick, I'll, because I don't foresee any other situation where I can say this bit about Multiverse of Madness, but I love the fact that movie has an actual like superhero suit up scene in the beginning of the movie, which I feel like sometimes I just want that from my superhero movies. It's, when Doctor Strange does, the sort of twirl as he, so anyway, so I feel like, you see a lot of those sensibilities, and I feel like this movie has a foot in each door. Like there are a lot of moments that actually do feel like older superhero movies in this, but then there's stuff that foreshadows everything to come. So I feel it was right on that cusp.
Yeah, but like, again, to me, this, if you watch this film, you can see how it did change the way things are done. Like Batman from 1989 has such a different feel from Iron Man in 2008. And this movie does feel like sort of a stepping stone between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, and that's sort of what I'm talking about. There were scenes where you've got like, where the cop cars are chasing after, the criminal, who we believe shot Uncle Ben, and some of those shots and stuff actually feel more akin to the sort of older generation of superhero movies, but then you've got the Peter swinging through the air, and like and that stuff feels like it belongs to the newer generation of stuff. So yeah, I think that this is definitely a big transitional film.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe that's why it was as successful as it was, because they're starting to touch on that formula that the MCU, like, I'm a fan of the MCU in general. It has its ups and downs. I'm not a fan of everything ever made in that setting, so to speak. But in general, I like them. It does feel like a bottled formula after a while. But I kind of almost feel like this film set the stage for that formula. It might, like, this might not be the final form, but if you sort of map how Iron Man plays out is very similar to the progression of this story.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm trying to be very polite here.
I mean, no, you don't. I know
Yeah.
we all know that you're not the biggest MCU fan.
I just
Like, some of
I
it you
don't
like, some of it you don't.
I don't think that you're wrong. I actually think you're quite right, but Sam Raimi brings such like so much of his personality to his films, which I don't feel like the MCU it does. It's so I don't know. So I feel that yes, in certain respects, but then like there's just so much about these movies that sort of radiates, you know.
Well, they're fun. They feel and they let us be Spider-Man. We're not watching Spider-Man. We get to go along for the swing.
Yeah.
In a way that we've never gotten to do before.
Yeah, that's like vastly different from anything that came before. You go back and look at the Batman films, you're watching Batman do things. Whereas with Spider-Man, you are flying through the air with him, and that just is not something that would have been possible.
Right. We get to see the spectacle from the perspective of the hero, which is, we get a good bit of that in Iron Man. We get a lot of that in this movie, and that gives you a different attachment to the story. It feels more kinetic. It feels more visceral, and that lets you connect in a way that you can't when you're watching the superhero be awesome.
Yeah, well, and I also think that has something to do with the specific superhero that you're telling a story about as well, because like even I would argue even with the X-Men films, you're watching the X-Men do things, but Spider-Man is a character that lends itself to being in that character's point of view because he's swinging through the air, and that's just exciting. But you wouldn't have been able to do it that way a few years prior. Like, so I think it comes hand in hand with the technological advancements, and then you move along to Iron Man, and that's also a character you get to sort of fly around with.
Right, you get to look over his shoulder as he's flying, or get that close up on his face with the heads up display, and that it just feels like you're right there.
Which is why Iron Man is like, I'll even say this as, someone who, as we've established many, many times, has mixed feelings about the MCU, but like Iron Man is one of like,
it's great.
I'm just going to say it. He's like the greatest, for me, he's always been the greatest asset of the MCU as established. And is a reason why I loved those movies of his in particular so much, and that first Iron Man movie is so much fun because like you're going along with him on the ride, and he's a ridiculously fun character to take you on that ride. Just all his wisecracking as you're inside the helmet with him, and it's fun.
But we get that here as well. Like,
yeah,
again, you contrasted it with like Tim Burton Batman movies. And I'm going to do so again. Not only are you like Batman doesn't banter. Like, he's hard, he's kinetic, he's drop the elbow on the bad guy, and disappear in a cloud of bats or a puff of smoke, all dramatic. During his actiony sequences, we as viewers are very separate from him. We don't. He comes off as almost unknowable.
Well, and because the bulk of the personality of those movies comes from the villains, and that's because Batman is so stoic and
So yeah, it doesn't make sense to follow Batman up close and personal the way it does a Spider-Man. But this hero does, and because of that, we do get his quippiness. We do get to see him fall on the ground and grunt in pain, and we do get to see him struggle. It's the wrong movie. It's Spider-Man 2, but my favorite shot in any superhero movie of all time is with Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 2. So I'll just, it's the train scene, and and really that whole thing all the way to the end where the kid hands him his mask back and everything.
It's so hard to not launch into talking about Spider-Man 2 because that is
a worthy conversation. We'll talk about it at some point in the future, I'm sure. It's worthy of a mention though, because it's also a great film, and it is this exact same iteration.
And I know that, you disagree just because I know Into the Spider-Verse is your favorite of the Spider-Man films. But for me, Spider-Man 2 is the crown and the jewel of the franchise. And so we are going to follow up with the discussion.
Probably the number 2,
Yeah. So it's just, and that's the thing, like the leap in visual effects just made it so that you could do things with this character in these films that we really hadn't seen in these types of movies before.
Yep. And it let us, again, follow them in a new and interesting way. I guess that's what I was trying to say earlier, is that I feel like when I watch this movie, I feel like I get to be Spider-Man. But when I watch Batman, I'm just watching Batman beat people up. Or I'm watching Superman save the day in that Superman 1978 film. It just feels different. It hits different. And maybe, as you say, that is down to the idea that Peter Parker is the everyman teenager.
Yeah, because I actually don't even know that it would necessarily be right for those characters because, Spider-Man is the person that, like, we can see ourselves being with, like, neither, Kal-El nor Bruce Wayne are immediately identifiable characters for us that we can place ourselves in their shoes.
Right. Maybe that's part of the difference too, is that I do feel the disconnect between like Bruce Wayne and Batman, but I don't feel a disconnect between Peter Parker and Spider-Man, especially not in this movie. Yes, he's got the mask on, but it still feels like the kid, the high school student I've been watching for the first half of the movie still. Sorry, I think I probably interrupted you, but...
No, it's fine. But yeah, so I think it's part of, it's a mixture of those things. It's the fact that, technologically they had never been able to do anything like this before, but also Spider-Man is the perfect character for us to be put in there, put in his shoes. And it's funny, I just made the argument that we can't really put ourselves in the place of Bruce Wayne or Kal-El, but apparently we can with Tony Stark because we fly around with him. But so I guess
the nature, his nature is so different from them though. I feel like Batman and Superman almost come across as archetypes more than characters. You know what I mean? But
but also, like, that's also the difference of when they were made as well, because like superhero movies were just different then, and those characters were supposed to be like larger than life characters who we were at a distance from. And I think it's different nowadays. You can even see that with the different iterations of Batman that we get, where we may not go along for the ride, so to speak, but with like installments like Batman Begins and The Batman were like getting into the nitty gritty of like what makes them tick in a way that the older Batman movies didn't. And I actually think they're trying. It's part of the reason why they're having difficulty figuring Superman out these days. Is like how to like
got that Boy Scout sort of reputation, and he's like on a power scale, he's so much larger than life that it just feels.
Yeah, he's supposed to be like this perfect being. So they're trying.
He ain't no Lilu though. Let's face it, he ain't no Lilu.
Yeah. Anyway, so getting back to.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Because there is something about the way they represent this particular version of Spider-Man that just works. And I remember there's a shot. Well, there's several very clever shots in this film, and early sort of like CG or early digital overlays in film. They were coming along and they became very convincing. There is a shot where Flash attacks him in the hallway shortly after he's gotten his powers, and there's that punch that's thrown, and he has time to like look where he's punching, look back at Flash, look at where he's punching again. And it's another one of those shots that's just kind of over the top, maybe a little winking at the camera. But it does a great job of getting a sense of his reflex time. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. And good use of, because you can't shoot that.
Yeah.
You have to shoot two different things and then overlay them perfectly. And so that is an effects shot, an effects heavy shot. Well, maybe not heavy, but it is an effects shot, but it's pretty flawless, that one. And there's something about that particular moment of him just like looking back and forth while the punch slowly moves across the screen. I love it. Mwah.
Yeah, no, it's and especially like and at the time that was some really cool looking stuff. Just the camera shots and I love Raimi's style overall because he's always doing some very wild stuff with the camera. And, I don't feel like he was as freed up in this one to do like what he did, say, on part 2, where he got to really tap into his horror roots. Because in part 2, we get that great scene when Doc Ock comes alive, in the hospital room, which is just beautiful. But still, you can still tell this is a Sam Raimi movie.
Yes, as you say, it's still like early enough in his career. He didn't have like maybe the full range to go nuts with some of his shots and shot construction and camera work. But you're right; you can definitely see his fingerprints on it. I also like, Spider-Man, again, metaphor for coming of age. A lot of Spider-Man stories are about that. It's funny to me that this version of Spider-Man, which is kind of the one that I first came to know well, doesn't have web shooters.
Yes.
It produces a sticky bodily fluid that is new to him now that he's going through puberty.
Which, okay, there's no way I'm not going to mention No Way Home with this, because that was so satisfying. Just the fact that, what do you need those for? Oh, it's my web shooters. And he does it, and they're all like, whoa!
Right.
Oh, you guys can't do that.
But just sort of like the meta of like, I'm a boy coming of age, and now my body is producing a sticky substance that I don't have full control over. I'm just like, yeah, that tracks. That tracks.
Which, and again, that was another thing that, like, I remember hearing stuff from like Spider-Man fans, like he's supposed to have web shooters to, like show, that he's sort of like a genius and he's
Right.
constructing the stuff. But I don't know. I always thought it was cool that, he's just gotten bit by a radioactive spider. He's got like spider powers. It made sense to me that would entail that his web shooters were organic and that they actually came out of his body. But like it was all leading to No Way Home, and and the joy of getting having the other Peters be like, so how does that work?
Right. Yeah, again, it is outside sort of the scope of this particular film, but I did love that they brought this, not only the actor, but this iteration of the character brought it into the modern zeitgeist. Really, at the time, at the beginning of the superhero craze, the MCU was not long after this. We had X-Men movies along the way. Like, they were trying, and they were getting, X-Men movies are hit or miss, let's be honest. Some of them are fantastic, some of them are not. But this is just, I don't know, it's one of those watershed moments for the genre, I think. And I really love that 20 years later, I love the MCU, but the most visceral moment I had is when Tobey Maguire is talking, how are you doing? He says, I'm trying to do better. And I felt everything from this movie and the films that come after it, like he's trying to do better. And that's what it's always been about. From the moment of, I don't see how that's my problem, through the Uncle Ben stuff, he's always trying to do better. And he doesn't always make it. He's not perfect. He's a flawed human being like the rest of us. But he's always trying to do better. And in this film, you feel that he is the type of person who isn't always going to get it right, but he's always going to try to do better.
Yeah, and just like, and I do feel like it's within the scope of this discussion because of what No Way Home did. It wasn't just like paying fan service. Like the way they did it fully integrated these films into the fabric of the modern Marvel Cinematic Universe, and so it doesn't feel like a cheap device where they just brought the actors in, and there's arcs that pay off in that movie so beautifully. And so for me, I think the MCU is all the more stronger for having done that, because this feels now like part of that fabric that they've been weaving. And
they brought back not only the hero but the antagonist of that of this movie. And Norman was the big bad guy in No Way Home too.
And he has a major impact on Tom Holland's Peter Parker.
He does. He kills Aunt May. But and it's so telling that it's Tobey who in that moment is the one who stops Tom Holland from basically murdering Norman Osborn at the end of the movie. And of course, that's what this version of Peter Parker would do. That's kind of established here. Like, he doesn't kill the Green Goblin. He basically dodges the Green Goblin's attack, then ends up killing himself. And by the way, one of the best death scenes in all of like comic book movie history. Just that.
Oh.
So good. I love it.
I just love it that everything else cuts out and it's just
and then boom, big spikes to the gut.
And then the fact that a second later you can have him going, don't tell Harry, and it's heartbreaking. It's like you just had this big laugh out loud moment, and then your heart's breaking in the next moment. It's just so It's so good.
Yeah, I love this movie. 20 years on, we're able to do a retro review of it, and it holds up. Again, maybe not the effects as well as we would like. I still think they're pretty good. They're not perfect by any means,
Oh yeah.
but I still think they're effective. And I remember when I first watched this, I thought Tobey Maguire was miscast. And
Oh
then I watched it, and I'm like, okay, I don't think he was miscast. But like in the run up when you're seeing trailers or whatever, I'm like, he doesn't look like a kid to me. But he acts enough like a kid, and he is youthful enough that I went there. I still feel like he looks too old, and that was a problem for me even back in 2002.
mm.
But the like, hey, he's an actor. He's trying to make a living, and he does a great job. And it's not like he looks like he's 40. You know, he's not going to high school with 5 o'clock shadow. So yeah, and I didn't know who he was up before I saw this film. So yeah, but I do love the movie. I do. It's one of those that, like, it's a milestone. It's a signpost in the evolution of nerd culture.
Yeah, and it's weird because I've had this weird thing lately, and it's been fairly recent for some reason, where I used to just sort of moan about movies getting older and be like, "Oh, I'm starting to get old," and all that stuff. But now there's been a certain joy in watching movies that are celebrating, their 20th or even 30th anniversaries, and looking back and noticing that they look now like they belong to another age, and it's my age. It's like when I was growing up. There's a certain charm that comes along with that, of like just seeing the evolution of things, but being able to look back very fondly on, this was movie making when I was, you know, when I was a teenager,
Right, right.
or whenever. And so, yeah, so I had a smile on my face going back to watch this, even for the stuff that didn't stand up, because I'm like, yeah, but it was pretty damn shiny looking when I was a kid.
When you
So
were 15 or
yeah.
16, whatever. Yeah. Eric says we haven't even talked about the bridge scene. You're right. We haven't. You want to talk about the bridge scene, John?
Um, what in particular? Yeah, Peter's like choice, and and the New Yorkers coming to his defense, which I always liked that element about Spider-Man movies. The fact that the New Yorkers are all there to back him up, and you get that more in Spider-Man 2 as well, and the train scene. And
Yeah. I think this is Dan brings this up. I think this is worth touching on. One small issue Dan has with this movie is how MJ kind of hits on Peter in the backyard later that evening after he beats up Flash, basically never noticing him up to that point. Feels like an unhelpful message to send young men. I agree. We said earlier, Dan, I think this was probably before you got here, MJ is a damsel in distress in this movie. Kirsten Dunst does great with what she's given to do, but MJ is not as much a character as she is a catalyst to get him to act. Like, he wants to get a car to impress MJ. That's why he goes to the wrestling thing. So yeah, it is not the healthiest message, but it is of its time, and we have never shied away from calling out imperfect things in the writing of films that don't necessarily hold up to our modern sensibilities, but I'm not going to tear this movie apart for it. But you are correct; it is a product of its time, and it's not the most helpful message to send young men. That you stand up to a girl, she's going to like you. No, she's going to like you, or she's not, and you just have to live with it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I don't necessarily know that she wasn't giving him the time of day at all before that. She was friendly with him.
Right. They were neighbors, but
and
she
they
was
were
never
neighbors.
like
But,
romantic or flirty.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I agree, Dan. Not the most helpful message. But yeah. I still think that overall this movie just works. Even with its imperfections, they still just works. What did you miss? Let's see, John. You know what, Christine? I'm glad you're here. Let's just start over from the beginning.
Okay, sounds good to me.
We can
I,
do
I,
that
I,
in 9 minutes or less, right?
I do want to come back around and just mention again the scenes once J.K. Simmons comes into the movie, because that pumps the movie full of like an all new type of energy once that happens, because I especially love with the supporting players and at the Daily Bugle, and Sam Raimi's brother playing the guy who keeps popping in, and we have a page 6 problem, we have a page 1 problem, and yeah. It's just great. And he's like, hey, I don't want it on my paper. We sold, however many copies, Jonah. Tomorrow, page 1, pictures of Spider-Man.
As long as there's not a page 3 problem. Am I right? Huh? Some people know what I'm talking about. Anyway, do Bonesaw again. My favorite one is just when he's like, Bonesaw is ready. It's great. I don't remember most of his lines. I did not get a chance. We decided this pretty last minute. I had D&D earlier today. I didn't really have time to rewatch the movie. I've seen it not too long ago, and I've seen it 20 times, so I was able to just, wing it, but I really wish I'd had a chance to do a rewatch.
The answer to that is I certainly hope so. I hope there is not a universe where he's played by anybody else, because that should be the one constant in every single universe.
Kate agrees. I agree. Like he is pretty brilliant as J. Jonah Jameson. It's so funny. Like when he laughs, that wheeze of wine he gets. It's just so good. It's just so good.
And you mentioned it earlier. I love that. I resent that. And it's like, in print, it's liable, not slander.
Mm-hmm.
God, but
J. Jonah Jameson is a Nexus being. Accurate.
Well, and I do feel like, and that's part of like why ever since that was the major thing in Spider-Man Far From Home that like fully hooked me into that iteration of Spider-Man. I enjoyed the movie incredibly. I remember watching it in theaters and thinking it was probably one of my favorite of the MCU movies. But then that post-credit scene pops up, and all of a sudden you hear that voice, and I'm like, oh, thank you. It just felt like such a wonderful reward to know that no matter which iteration of Spider-Man this is, and that was before we even knew how hard they were going to go into the multiverse. But I just felt comforted in knowing that they couldn't think of anybody better than J.K. Simmons to play the part.
Well, and God bless J.K. Simmons for coming back to do it.
Yeah,
because he was already a very accomplished actor when this movie was made. And maybe he probably lent some respectability to this film by having his name attached because he was well known. Probably even more so now because he got like he did that movie Whiplash that got him a lot of like buzz, and so like and he didn't have to come back to play this character, but he did, and he plays it so flawlessly in this film. You can see him evolving into the character he becomes in No Way Home, and it's just so good.
And I just love, in the beginning of No Way Home, like, before he hits it big with that report, like he's just sitting in like a big empty room with a green screen.
I forgot that, Guilty. Like, but you're right. If you've ever watched The Legend of Korra, J.K. Simmons is the voice of Tenzin, Aang's firstborn. Nessie! Hi, Nessie. I'm glad you stuck in right before the ending. Like, I'm literally considering moving towards the wrap-up as we speak. I don't know that I can really say much else about this movie anyway. It's fun, funny. It's got a lot. It's got good heart. It's got it where it counts. It's not perfect, but it's got everything it needs where it counts.
Yeah, for me, like the sort of the pinnacle of Spider-Man comes with the next one. I think that's just an absolutely beautifully constructed film from beginning to end. It's the one where Sam Raimi was really firing on all cylinders. But that said, like this is
can't
still,
get there without this.
Yeah. And then this is an outrageously fun movie and an incredibly important film in the superhero genre. Right. And it's there's no overstating like how big of an impact this had when it came out. It was a big deal, and I just remember the lead up to it and going to see it and having the big stupid grin on my face the whole time. So I love this movie, and yeah, definitely set the stage for a lot that has come over the years.
Yeah, as you say, like Spider-Man 2, in my opinion, is the better film, but you could never make Spider-Man 2 without making Spider-Man first. So from that point of view, this is probably the more important film, air quotes. But yeah. Okay, Potter, I see. I'm going to put it up just because I love you, buddy. That's true. You have to go all the way to Spider-Man 3 before you get dancing Peter Parker.
It was worth it's worth having that movie just for the reference to it in Into the Spider-Verse, which and all the memes on the internet, all the memes in the world won't make that a better movie, but it sure has been entertaining.
And neither one has any ducks in them. There might be a duck in our background shot. Mom's playing into Potter's, love you, Mom, love you, Potter, but stop it. No.
We're going to make sure we bring up the ducks when we do the, Everything Everywhere All at Once stream over on my channel. Because we have to make sure we alert the people that there are, in fact, ducks.
All right, y'all. I think that's the end for us, though. Yeah. It's been a 2-hour stream. It's about all I can stand of you people. I mean,
plus I have to go to the bathroom for once. It's me.
John has to pee. I kind of have to pee. But we love you guys. Thank you for joining us this week. Come back next week where we talk about John. We never did decide, did we? Oh yeah, sort of like fall preview.
Yeah, which is great because I have lots of thoughts about stuff coming ahead, which will probably change. Will probably change the second I watch them.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to have that talk. And Nessie's still not going to be back next week. So maybe if anybody wants to join us,
Yeah, by all means, come on and talk about shows that are coming up. Yeah, Nessie says she'll be back in a few weeks. We miss you, but understand that you've got important life stuff going on. But we miss you, sis. We miss you. Get back as soon as you can. Don't rush, but get back as soon as you can. All right, so yeah, join us next week where we'll just kind of have a more relaxed, less focused conversation. Just looking forward to the good stuff that we hope is coming this fall and winter to TV. And until then, take care of each. Oh, sorry. God dang it! I almost got to the end without that yawn eking out. Didn't quite make it. But yeah, so love you guys. We'll see you all next week. And until then, you know what it is. Peace and be excellent to each other.